So far, we've focused only on the data model and behavior, and we've not been concerned at all with the visual design of the application. We could say that we've been doing only development tasks. Thus, we've created and developed a set of objects, some transactions, some lists, some web panels created automatically by applying the work with pattern, and others that we created from scratch. However, we don't have an organized application yet, and we haven't even started to envision it that way. That's because we've been learning the basics of GeneXus, focusing on just some parts. But, understandably, this is not the approach we'll take when we start developing a real-life application. In fact, the development of an application does not start with the development itself. It begins after a very important previous stage, which is the user experience design. There, the conceptual structure of the application as a whole is organized first. The objective is to obtain a product that meets the expectations of both the user and the business, and that communicates exactly what it should in the most effective and economical way possible. This includes the interface design, as well as the navigation and information design. The visual design we see in the finished product is built on this organizational skeleton. Although we won't go into details of this very important task here, we can realize that we'll end up viewing the result of the foundations laid by these previous stages. Each one is the basis for the next. Only with the resulting surface stage will we have the visual design to start the actual development. Looking at the GeneXus website, we can quickly grasp the user experience decisions that were made when designing this web application. A basic principle is to achieve a good contrast. And here we see that it was done with white, black, gray, and red. The most important actions that the user can do are shown as buttons, which have a consistent style and therefore can be easily recognized. Their color depends on the background, black or white, but clearly the main color for actions and highlights is this one. In fact, if we look at the main navigation menu that will appear as a header on all pages, the submenus are displayed when going through the options. And this is the color that indicates the active option, which looks similar to that of the company's brand. We can also see that there will be a footer repeated on all pages, which is where the language can be changed, following a convention that all internet users are familiar with. The language can be changed in the header or footer. Also note that the font families are consistent and that they're used in the same way, the same sizes for the titles, descriptions, and so on. In addition, it's possible to indicate which information is related and must therefore be interpreted as a whole, based on how closely the controls are placed and the spacing in relation to the others, and by alternating the background color. So here we have the first set of information. Here's another, and another one with a light gray background, and so on. If we look down here, we see that this all corresponds to a block of related information, with this repetitive pattern indicating that there are 3 subunits of information that are at the same level. Here we see another block where the user will infer a little bit the same as before. There are cognitive patterns that every user will recognize. For example, let's look at another one. Here we find another block of information, where blocks of information alternate with text on the left, an image, and then the same 2 things but inverted, to alternate again. Clearly, this is a narrative block of information. Therefore, alignment, spacing, and grouping of controls will be essential, and we must know how to implement them in a layout. Everything we've analyzed corresponds to both the design skeleton and to the visual design itself, where the choices of colors, fonts, and so on are materialized. Behind a given design, there's a number of fairly abstract decisions aimed at providing standardization, consistency, and ease of use. We're talking about design systems because the design of an application or family of applications works as an interrelated system. Until now, we've focused on a single role, the developer, who's in charge of development. But if we look at this new task, that of user experience design, we'll find another role that takes the lead in this stage, the designer. He or she usually makes decisions, such as the ones we've seen in the example regarding the specification of the design system. We would be missing the intermediary role that is the front-end developer, who's in charge of the effective and specific implementation of the design in the application. In this case, in GeneXus, using the tools provided by GeneXus to work with design systems. Since we only want to see an introduction here, we will not address the ways to directly import into GeneXus the design created by the designer in his or her preferred tool. But we'll say that this is possible. The designer designs the screens with a tool such as Sketch or Figma, and the front-end developer imports it into GeneXus, which will automatically build the objects with all the design incorporated. And there, the front-end developer will have minimal work to do. What we'll do next is to see how GeneXus already provides a default design system that we can customize. It's called Unanimo. We've seen it in action all the time. For example, let's take a close look at the running work with. In the central area of the page, there's information from the attractions web panel created by the pattern, with uniform criteria in relation to the country's work with. Note, for example, that in both cases, a search field is available, where information is filtered by name, here for attractions, and here for countries. Both fields look identical, and they behave in the same way. We can also notice another similarity. In both screens, the same actions are offered to insert, update, and delete, with the same appearance. Here we see the same three actions, and we'd also added another one, outside the grid, to invoke a PDF list. However, note that it's less highlighted than the Insert button. It's a more subtle button. That's a design decision. If we go to the transaction to update this attraction, we can also see that the Confirm button is the relevant one, and the Cancel button is more subtle. The actions are displayed with a predominant color, which is also used for other things. Now let's notice that when we navigate deeper and choose to see one of the attractions, it offers the option to go back to the parent. And this navigation is also a consistent pattern. Throughout the application, we'll expect this pattern of returning to the screen from which we arrived at the current one. Now let's notice that all screens have text that clearly indicates where we are. Here we're in Brazil's information screen. Let's take a look at its appearance. Here we're in countries with the same appearance. Here in attractions. And if we choose to update one, we're in the attraction transaction. The question that comes up, where has the appearance of these texts been defined? That is, their font, font size, and color. And so, what if we want to change it, for example, to red? How do we go about it? Let's edit the transaction layout. And let's see the text block that implements the text that we see at runtime. If we look at its properties, this one appears, class. The class with this name has been associated with it. It's here, in this class, where most of the design properties will be defined. If we go to see the text in the attractions work with, it's also a text block control, which also has the same class assigned to it. It also has a class assigned for the cell where the control is located in the table. For now, we won't pay attention to it. If we now see the view of an attraction, It's the attraction name attribute control that marks the page where we are. And it's not a coincidence that it has this class associated with it. The question now is this: where are the style definitions of that class located? If we go to see the properties of the version of the KB we're working with, among them we see 1, default style. It has an associated object, which happens to have the same name as the KB. When we open the window to make a selection, we see that the types of objects of the KB that could be specified here are of the design system type. In our KB, we have one that's created by default in the root module, and that we can modify. It's the default one precisely. In addition, there are these other ones in the GeneXus Unanimo module that come by default in every KB we create, and will be read-only objects. That is to say, they can be used but not modified. Let's look for our default object, the design system that will govern most of the design of the controls and layouts of our KB. We open it. We have this Tokens tab, and later we'll see what it's used for. And this other one, Styles, which is the most relevant one. It seems to be empty, but it's not. Note that it's asking to import everything that comes from this other design system object, which is one of the design system objects that come with every KB and that implement the Unanimo design system. It can be found in the GeneXus Unanimo module, under the References node. Here the Tokens section is no longer empty, and the Style section is much less so. This is where the classes that are later associated with the controls are defined. We see that this DSO, Design System Object, is not starting from scratch either. It's importing all the definitions of these two. And therefore, we have the DSO of our KB built from this DSO tree. We're looking for the characteristics of the heading 01 class. So we can search for it by pressing Ctrl F. Classes are selected with a period. Here we find it. Before moving on, let's review what we were doing. The text block or attribute controls of web panels and transactions, whose function was to show a title on each screen to indicate where we are, had this associated class. These web panels and transactions have a design system object defined by default. It's that of the KB. So they'll look for the class properties there. But for now, this object does not have its own classes. It only has the ones imported from this DSO. It's as if they were copied. And that's why we look for them here. Let's look at the properties it's configured. They include the font family, font size, and color. What do the dollar signs before fonts, font sizes, and colors mean? They're references to tokens. And what are tokens? Names given to values. In programming, we call them constants. For example, let's analyze the color property. We are indicating that the color will be taken from the value of the color constant named onBackground. Where should we look for it? In the Tokens tab. But it's not here. So what now? Oh, that's right. This DSO is importing two others. Among those that matter are the tokens. Let's look for our color token in one of those two DSOs, because it'll have to be in one of them. Here the Tokens tab appears very crowded. It's possible that here we'll find what we're looking for. Let's see that the editor is double. And so, if we select this color token, the one named primary, in the graphical editor on the right, we see a color that on the left is defined with a hexadecimal value. This color looks familiar, doesn't it? It's the one that we've seen repeatedly in the actions and buttons. It has not been named primary just for the sake of it. The one we're looking for is the color token named onBackground. If the token was given a semantically clear name, we can assume it's the color that will be used to contrast against the background. And here we have it. What happens if we change the value of the token so that it goes from black to red? Supposedly, with that we'll be able to change the color of the text that we were interested in, those of the heading 01 class. Let's try it. We want to modify its value, but we don't have the change enabled. The reason is that this object is read-only. So this customization will have to be done in our design system object, that of our application. Let's copy the definition of the token. Note that tokens are specified within a set of all the tokens of the object. We will not go into details about the light and dark options here. We'll only say that the token definitions can vary according to these parameters. Therefore, in the Tokens tab of our Design System object, we define the set following the syntax. What we do is simply overwrite the color token that will be imported along with all the others of the DSO, that in turn imports those of the other ones. We change the color value here with this hexadecimal, or directly with the value red. Let's save and run. We managed to change the color of the title of each page, but not just that. We changed the color of many more controls than we wanted. Of course, the onBackground color token is used in the class of these controls, but obviously it's also used in many others. If we only want to change it for that class, then what we have to overwrite is the class. And here we can't, it's read-only, so we copy it and paste it into our DSO. But actually, since it's imported, we don't need to overwrite everything, but only the property that we're interested in changing. We save and run. We press Ctrl 5 so that it's refreshed. And now it does. Only the color of the controls that have the heading 01 class associated with them changed. Considering everything we've seen so far, what should happen if we change the value of the primary color token? Note how the color of the buttons and actions in general have changed. Here we can see that the hover action changes the color, and we can assume that this will be a property of the class that controls the hover effect. The same goes for the buttons. Even here, the visited link is shown in this color, something that we can also change in the DSO. We talked about the importance of spacing, for example, and of defining appropriate font families and sizes to be used consistently in the application. We will not be surprised to find these tokens in Unanimo. They'll be used in the classes assigned to the properties to give space or to choose fonts. On the other hand, how do you achieve alignment and combine information elements so that they work as a block? That's where GeneXus controls are involved, mainly the tables. In other words, two key players will be involved, the controls and layouts, and their classes in the DSO. In addition, in order to save resources, we'll be able to encapsulate repetitive information units in independent objects that can then be inserted in the layouts, such as stencils or web components. Even the header and footer are separated in another object, the master page. And here it is. Let's see what happens when we change this text block. In this way, we start to understand how to use a design system in GeneXus.